Hey guys, how are you doing today? In this video, I want to show you our three-step approach to hypothesis testing, the last building block in this course. This is by far the hardest one to teach, but it's not necessarily the hardest one to do. And that's because it's where you can get the most creative. There are many possible answers that work, not only one or a few that are correct. Because you can do anything as long as you're actually testing the hypothesis in a feasible way. Our three-step approach will help you to do that, but if you don't follow it, it doesn't mean you're gonna get it wrong. So, because of this, the best way to learn this is to practice. This three-step approach is gonna help you, but you're only going to learn by practicing a lot. And that's why you're gonna see several drills in this chapter, and that's also why I'm going to teach you by the end of this video how to come up with your own hypothesis testing follow-up questions to practice. Okay, so let's move on. The three-step approach involves step number 1, defining your hypothesis, step number 2, breaking it down, and step number 3, gathering and processing data. And showing it the way you'd present it. You're not necessarily going to do all the steps here. You might not need to define your hypothesis, or you might choose not to define your hypothesis to the interviewer. You may not need to break the hypothesis down into simpler hypotheses, because maybe you're able to test that hypothesis straight away instead of breaking it down into simpler hypotheses. Maybe you won't need to show the interviewer how you would gather and process data, or at least you just want to show them some crucial things of how you do that and not others. As long as you tell them what you need to be closer to proving or disproving the hypothesis and how you'd get it, you are fine. So this is different from estimations, for example. In an estimation, if you don't do your structuring, or if you don't do the reality check, the interviewer is actually going to take points away from you for that. In the hypothesis testing questions, as long as you get what you tell them, how you're going to get what you need and what you need, you're fine. You're going to do well in this question. Okay? Now, I want to show you a case question to which you can come up with your own answer for. And then I want to show you the follow-up questions, which is a hypothesis testing question. And as I said, as I've done in other step-by-step videos, I'm not going to show you the answer for the framework question, only for the follow-up questions. But feel free to come up with your answer for it, because it might help you with your hypothesis testing. You might have actually covered the hypothesis testing question in it. And you're still getting more practice for framework questions. And this is a cool framework question. So, DSC is a large drugstore chain in Brazil with 10% market share, 1,100 stores, and 9 billion Brazilian reais in revenues. The company faces challenges with losses for as long as they can keep track of their data. So they are losing products that were otherwise good to be sold. Currently, their losses are at 1% of revenues, and that's cost of products lost divided by total revenues, while their main competitors are at 0.5%. And they've hired you to help them reverse those losses. So how can DSC reduce their losses? And now to the follow-up question, the hypothesis testing question. You mentioned it's possible that poor handling of products in distribution centers is a possible cause for the losses. How would you test whether that is true or not? You should know that we have 2 different distribution centers, and each one of those serves roughly half of our stores. Alright, so take your time, come up with your answer, but definitely come up with your answer again after hearing each one of the steps, so that you can learn each one of them thoroughly, and then apply them in your practice from then on. Now, I'm going to explain step 1 of the 3-step process, and then I'm going to show you how I would do step 1. And you should probably do step 1 before watching my answer, and then watch it and try to understand what's different, and only then move on to step 2. Okay? So what you need to know is defining your hypothesis means defining what is the cause, the effect, and the consequence in this hypothesis. And all hypotheses must have a cause, an effect, and a consequence. I'll show you an example for this in a second. And next thing you need to know is this step is only here to help you. You might decide to do it and show it to the interviewer. You might decide to do it and not show it to the interviewer, and you might even decide not to do it at all. And that does not mean you're not gonna pass this question, you're not gonna do well in this question. But this step is meant to help you clear your thoughts and come up with your tests, and it really, really does help it. Okay? So when you break up your hypothesis like this, you have much more clarity of what is there, what is it you want to test, what is it you can test, and what you can't. Okay? Let me show you an example so this is going to be more clear. So the question is poor handling of products in distribution centers the cause for the losses? The cause, effect, and consequence here are: cause, distribution center employees are poorly trained or reckless, and that causes them to handle products poorly, and the consequence of that is that distribution centers cause losses of otherwise fine products. And even if you decide not to show this first part to the interviewer, the second part of this step is crucial, and I would definitely recommend that you show it to the interviewer, which is stating the sentence of the hypothesis you want to test. And the one here would be: the excessive product losses faced by drugstore chain DSC are a result of bad handling in either one or both of their distribution centers. Okay? So now let's move on to step 2, breaking the hypothesis down into simpler hypotheses. And the logic behind this step is breaking your hypothesis down into those other hypotheses that need to be true in order for that one to be true. You need to do that because you need simple hypotheses to test. You can't test overly complicated hypotheses. If your hypothesis is simple enough, though, and you can test it already, then you don't need to do that. How do you know if it's simple enough? Again, it's only simple enough if you can test it straight away. If you can't test it straight away, then you probably need to break it down. Okay? So the first principle that you need to know here is that logical breakdowns are better. Your breakdown might not be 100% messy, but the closer to that, the better. And you might not test all of the sub-hypotheses, the simpler hypotheses that you come up with, but you need to at least show your interviewer that you have a plan of what you're going to do if you need even more certainty. Okay? And this brings me to the second principle: quick tests versus exhaustive tests. So if you need to run quick tests, you can always pick the one or two most important ones and controversial ones in your breakdown. So that means that you'll pick the ones that are going to mean the most to the main hypothesis and that you know the least the answer to. So if it's something quite simple or that you have a good idea of what it's going to be, then that might not be the test that you want to do straight away. And if it's something that's not going to affect so much the main hypothesis that you're trying to test, then you might not want to test it straight away too. You might want to pick one that you don't know the answer to and that it's really going to change the chances that the main hypothesis is true or false. Okay? And this is not the only way to do quicker tests. We're going to see this in the third step, but it's one of the ways, and you're probably going to use both of them together. Next, availability of data should be in your mind when you're doing this step. You're not yet going to tell the interviewer how you're going to come up with the data, how you're going to gather that data, and how you're going to process it, but you don't want to put yourself in a dead end. So if you obviously can't get data for some of the most important tests in your breakdown, then you probably should try to come up with a different way to break down this problem, because otherwise you're going to put yourself in a dead end and you're not going to be able to complete your hypothesis test. And now I'm going to show you my answer or at least the second step of my answer. So make sure you've done it yourself too before you watch mine. So the hypothesis I want to test here is, are excess losses caused by poor handling in distribution centers? And by excess losses, I mean those losses that are above 0.5% of revenues, which is my benchmark. So there are two main hypotheses that will answer this question. First one is, do these excess losses really come from distribution centers? And the second one, are they really caused by mishandling? If they come from distribution centers and are caused by mishandling, then this hypothesis has to be true. And to find out if they come from distribution centers, I would try to figure out where in the product's path from supplier to consumer do these excess losses come from. And in a second, I'm going to talk about how I would find that out. And to find out if they're really caused by mishandling, first, I'd need to know what kind of loss is behind the excess losses. So are they caused by expired products? Are those products going missing, or are those products damaged? Number two, where in the distribution center process do these losses come from? So from supplier to leaving to the store, leaving the distribution center to the store, there are several steps in the distribution center process. I want to know where it is, and then I want to investigate that step of the process to figure out what exactly is behind that. Okay, so now let's move on to step 3. I'm going to show you how it works, and then I'm going to show you the last step of my answer. The third step is how you would gather and process data. That actually means what you would be doing in real life. This is what we want to tell the interviewer. So what data do you want to get? How would you get it? How would you turn it into information? What do you expect it to look like? Again, of course, you might not say all of these things to the interviewer, but you at least need to show them that if you were in a real project, if this was your assignment, you'd be able to complete it well, and it'd be clear to your manager, to the partner, to the client, whether the hypothesis is true or not, and you'd be based on data to do that. And of course, you can get that data and process it yourself. And next, indicative tests versus conclusive tests. As I said before, choosing only a part of the hypothesis to test is not the only way to do it quicker. You can do indicative tests, which are tests that don't necessarily prove your hypothesis true or false, but shows that it's much more likely for it to be true or false, versus doing conclusive tests where the data actually prove the hypothesis, or very, very, very close to proving the hypothesis. I'm going to show you some examples of this in my own answer. Okay? So take your time and come up with the third step of your answer, or with the full answer all over again if you want to. And only then watch my answer, which I'm going to show you now. First thing, well, here is my second step. And I want to show you how I would test the first part of my little framework here. And this is, I try to draw a chart like this. All the steps from supplier to consumer. So arrival from the supplier, distribution center, transport, and store. And I want to compare my losses with my benchmark in each one of those steps. What I expect it to look like is I have a lot more losses in the distribution center than my benchmark, and the losses are similar in all other steps. If I can't get data from my benchmark, which is likely, I would test one distribution center against the other. So I'd get my losses as a percentage of revenues in each one of the steps, and what I would expect it to look like is one distribution center having much more losses than the other, or else both distribution centers with much more losses than all other steps. So take a look at this. These second tests are not conclusive. So benchmarking one distribution center against the other does not conclude to me, even if one of these, actually, even if this last one is the case, it doesn't prove to me that distribution center is the cause. Maybe all of the losses are supposed to come from distribution centers. And what's weird in DSC is that we have losses in arrival from supplier, we have losses in transport, we have losses in store, or something like that. And we wouldn't know because we can't compare it to the benchmark, which might even have more losses than us in the distribution centers, but not so much more losses, but no losses at all in the other steps. Okay, but this at least indicates that we have a problem in distribution center indeed. And another lesson here is that anytime you have the opportunity to draw charts and that would make communication simpler, take that chance and do it. That's going to help you speak the interviewer's language. Communication is going to be much simpler and much clearer. And also something that I want you to notice here is there's additional information in this chart that would have been hard, or at least not as quick to convey if I were speaking it only. And this is what are the steps in the distribution center in the process from the consumer to the supplier. So whereas before I only said the steps from supplier to consumer, now I'm showing what would be the steps that I would use in my analysis. And next, what I expect the data to look like. So I clearly drew here my expectations of what the data should look like. If it does not look like this, then my conclusion would be slightly or a lot different. Now let's move on to the next step, to the next sub-hypothesis, where we're gonna see all of this again. So what kind of loss is behind the excess losses? How am I gonna find that out? I wanna break down those losses between those three types that I said before. Missing products, expired products, and damaged products. And I want to compare distribution centers if I can't compare it to benchmarks. And I believe it's highly unlikely that I can compare it to benchmarks. If I can, well, that's great. If I can't, I'm going to do this indicative test here and have an idea of what's going on. And what I expect to see is either a lot more damaged products in distribution centers or in only one of them. Okay? And to find out where in the distribution center process these losses come from, I would do pretty much the same as I did in the first test, draw out the process, but I would find the losses by type of loss in each step of the process. So what losses are expired products, missing products, and damaged products in the reception, in sorting, in storage, in picking, in boxing, and in exit. And if I see something like what I'm seeing in this chart, which is a lot of damaged product losses, which are much more than all other losses in one or two steps, or even all of them, then there's probably something going on, and I want to go investigate the root cause of that to find out that it actually is mishandling. And the way I do that is probably go to the distribution center or to the distribution centers and look at the process, see what's going on, try to see the damaged products, try to see them being damaged. I would talk before that probably to the manager and to whoever is in charge of that specific process and try to gather from them what they think is causing those losses, what is different from the other distribution center in there, and then I'd get to the root cause of the problem. And now, to tell you, like I said in the beginning, an interesting way to come up with your own hypothesis testing questions, it's fairly simple. So you've seen in frameworks before that you are always going to come up with several hypotheses by the end of your framework. And the interviewer could pick any one of those and ask you how you would test them. And what you can do is draw your framework for any case, look at what your hypotheses are, and each one of those can work as a follow-up question for hypothesis testing. Pick any one of those or pick all of those and test them, and that is your way of practicing. As I said, practicing is the only real way to learn hypothesis testing. If you do that with partners, not necessarily one interviewing the other, but both come up with your own answers and then you discuss both of them, which one will give you more certainty of your conclusion, which one won't, which one's quicker or less costly, and which one is less. And you're gonna be able to practice and learn a lot with that. Okay? So I hope this drill helped you. I hope this theory too helped you, and I'll see you in the next videos. You're gonna have several different hypothesis testing videos to help you here, and I honestly hope you can learn this and apply this and improve your case performance and hopefully get your offer. See you in the next one.